Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. President Donald Trump on Wednesday said that India will soon find out about his decision on the punitive CAATSA sanctions after India signed a $5 billion deal to purchase the much-vaunted S-400 air defense system from Russia. Under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA sanctions, which was amended early this year, only Trump has the authority for the presidential waiver to India on weapons deals with the sanctions-hit Russia. India last week inked a $5 billion purchase of S-400 Triumf air defense system from Moscow. Amidst the suspense, Ambassador of Russia to India, Nikolay Kudashev, on Thursday said that US sanctions will not be a pressure on India-Russia defense deals, and the two countries will further intensify their military cooperation and defense purchases in the coming days. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the game of chess between Russia, the United States and India. Joining me on the program today are Harshvi Pant, Head, Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation; Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador; and KP Nair, strategic analyst. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. What do you make of President Donald Trump's statement, really? Is it a threat? Does that mean we get a waiver? What is it really?
Well, frankly, I think there is an ominous ring to it, though he hasn't really specified in any detail what he means by saying whatever he did. But let me say that while we hope for the best, we should be prepared for the worst. On our part, we have done everything possible to assuage the feelings of the Americans in this regard. We have explained to them that our defense purchases from Russia have come down quite a lot, in fact, drastically. We have explained to them that any purchases that we intended to make from Russia were not going to be targeted against the United States. And we've also pointed out that it is in their interests that India's defense capabilities be increased, because they want us to play the role of a partner in the Asia-Pacific region. So on our part, I think at every possible level, we have explained to them our points of view. We have given them very cogent and convincing reasons. And frankly, the impression that was created was that they were sympathetic to our point of view. So now things are in a very unpredictable situation, particularly because just 3 weeks back, the Americans have imposed sanctions against China for the purchase of the S-400 missile defense system. And we have announced that we intend to make certain purchases of oil from Iran. 2 Indian companies would be purchasing oil from Iran, and that is a matter of concern also to the Americans. So I don't really know what is going on in President Trump's mind, but as I said, let's hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst.
Okay, hope for the best and prepare for the worst is what the ambassador is suggesting. Now, Mr. Nair, how is the Congress looking at the present situation, and is anything in the Congress's hands really as far as the CAATSA is concerned?
You see, Congress is likely to be a bigger problem than the president in this situation, because most of the Russia-related legislation by the Congress after the alleged interference in the American presidential elections were passed by the Congress unanimously. So Trump cannot even veto the congressional moves, because even if he vetoes, they will go back, because their support, the support for anti-Russia legislation in the Congress is way above the threshold on all issues. Congress is very firm, but we, at the same time, we have a lot of goodwill in the Congress.
Yeah, there are several senators who have come and said that India is very crucial, especially as far as America's Indo-Pacific strategy is concerned. So they do not want to do anything to irk us, really.
Actually, the India caucus in the House is the biggest caucus on Capitol Hill. It's even bigger than the Israeli caucus. The Senate caucus is also very big. While that is true, Russia is a different ball game. It's for the American strategic community, the military-industrial complex, it's a different game. We must also weigh whether it is worthwhile using our leverage in the Congress in this particular matter, because there are so many other things where we need the support of the Congress, like H-1B, trade issues and all that. So India will have to take the call and then decide whether to influence the Congress to such an extent that Congress comes into the picture. But left to President Trump, my feeling is that he will give a waiver.
But he has shown us that he can be unpredictable. He can, it's really difficult to say what he can possibly do. So, but do you still believe that he could give us a waiver?
You see, he can be unpredictable on issues that concern America from his point of view. And Russia is not something that concerns him. It concerns everybody else in America. It concerns the Congress, it concerns the Pentagon, it concerns the State Department. But Putin is a friend of his. So while he may take a tough line, the president may take a tough line on trade issues and similar things that he sees as affecting America, the India's relations with Russia, in my view, is not something that bothers him. He himself wanted good relations and he would like to have good relations. Left to himself, I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, I'm sure he would like America to buy Russian arms for himself,
Okay.
Of course, it will not happen. So I don't think he will, that is my hunch, that he will take a position against India.
Right. Let me go across to Professor Harshvi Pant now. Professor, is it time for us now to call upon our goodwill in the Congress, maybe reach out to the Indian diaspora and see how this matter can be settled, or do you think that has already happened?
No, I think there has been efforts made. India has made efforts at multiple levels in this regard and continues to make them, because I think, as the ambassador pointed out, things are now coming to a boil. So I think something may happen very soon. And we have seen that back channel negotiations were going on. We know that National Security Advisor was there trying to meet Pentagon officials and the State Department officials a few weeks back, trying to clarify India's position. So I think India is trying to leverage all the instrumentalities at its disposal. I think the question that India faces is something very, is a very critical one, in the sense that if this were a normal administration, I think much of what we were saying today would be of relevance. But because this is an administration that often acts very, very differently compared to the previous administrations, we really don't know. We are in uncharted territory. And I think I would agree with Mr. Nair that there is a logic to Indo-US relationship which sections of the Trump administration understand. And they have clearly signaled that, look, we will be very sympathetic. After all, one of the reasons why this waiver was negotiated was also with keeping India factor in mind when the US Congress was debating, came out with CAATSA. So I think,
and we've maintained right from the start, and even during the 2+2 dialogue, we told the Americans, I mean, there are several reports in the media that suggest that we told them that we are going to go ahead with this S-400 deal.
Absolutely. And the rationale was explained to them, the logic was explained to them, the logic of, the underlying logic of Indo-US relationship, which we were worried when Mr. Trump came to office, but it was sort of sorted out when Mr. Modi went there, and after that there has been an upward trajectory. But the thing is, we really don't know what happens when Mr. Trump gets up in the morning, what makes him angry. So it just, there's something very random may happen, and he'll just say, well, there should be sanctions on India. So this is he doesn't go by the sheer logic of things. And therefore, it's difficult sitting here to predict what he may or may not do. I think the thing that India perhaps has already done and should keep on doing is to keep the negotiating channels open and keep this logic of Indo-US partnership front and center when these discussions happen. And we have seen the success of it. For example, all the top-level administration officials have come to this conclusion that having a strong relationship with India is important. If you see the kind of testimonies that they have given to the US Congress, Mike Pompeo made a very strong statement as well.
And especially at a time when the trade war is looming between the US and China.
I think this is that's particularly important. But I think what may also happen is that there is conflation happening. Russia may not be important, but Iran may be very important. Iran also is important for the domestic political purposes for this administration. So if you conflate the two in the minds of Mr. Trump, then you say, well, why is India doing this? And India is also doing this. So why not have sanctions on India? I think that may be the logic that may work. And I think that's a very difficult position to be in.
Right. Since Iran has been brought up, I think we have to spend some time on Iran as well. Ambassador, Mr. Nair believes that, it's a hunch that he's going on that we may get a waiver as far as Russia is concerned. But is the same leeway going to be given to us, say, for instance, with when it comes to, oil and Iran?
Well, I'll take a cue from my other two panelists. President Trump does not have that strong a dislike for Russia as he has for Iran. If the Iranian deal on oil matters with us, if our two oil companies were not going to buy oil from Iran and had an announcement to this effect not been made, it is possible that the waiver to us in regard to our purchase of S-400 anti-missile air defense system from Russia would have perhaps gone through. However, things become more complicated because a month from now we are also planning to buy oil from Iran. And I think President Trump has a great dislike for Iran. That is why he scrapped the deal with Iran.
The nuclear deal.
The whole picture gets more muddy at the moment. Frankly, President Trump does not like CAATSA. If you recall, while signing CAATSA, he had severely criticized it because from his point of view, it imposes restrictions on his freedom to conduct foreign relations. However, he will use CAATSA where it suits him. He has used it to impose sanctions on China. And when it comes to Iran, and if we are seen to be flouting what he perceives as the US laid down themes for not doing any oil trade with Iran, and if we go ahead, then that becomes a more complicating factor. As things stand at the moment, the deal with Russia, coupled with the likely import of oil from Iran, do give a little ominous touch to the entire scenario. And like they have imposed sanctions in Iran, I wouldn't be very on China. I wouldn't be very surprised if sanctions are also imposed on us. Of course, that's not the end of the road, because there is nothing very finite about these matters. All these issues are subject to ongoing discussion, dialogue. Even if sanctions are imposed, we should not take it as the end of the world. We should negotiate for them to be lifted. Of course, we will find out very soon whether any sanctions are going to be imposed. Till then, it is looking into the crystal ball.
All right. Mr. Nair, November 4th is not too far away, is what the ambassador is suggesting. As far as Iran is concerned, in the past, we have had waivers from the United States because Iran and the US, of course, history tells us that they have a long history and they've had a dogged history as well. So do you believe that, what's changed really this time around, from the past?
Well, in the first place, the president, because Barack Obama always wanted to have a settlement with Iran. That was one of his unstated objectives when he came into office. And he didn't do much in his first term because he knew that if he did a nuclear deal with Iran in his first term, it would so antagonize the Jewish lobby in the United States that he wouldn't have been re-elected. So he did it in his second term when he didn't have to seek re-election. But Trump is a completely different kettle of fish. He as Ambassador said, he doesn't like Iran. He has a visceral hatred for the mullahs in Qom and Tehran. That changed. But you mentioned the last waiver, the previous time when it happened. You see, that time we acted in concert with Japan, Korea, and some other countries which were also consumers of the Iranian oil.
yeah.
And these are allies of the United States. And they had approached the Americans saying that, you know, we can't do away with Iranian oil just like that. So India was part of a concert of American allies who wanted relief from the sanctions on Iran. I am not sure, actually, I haven't checked about the status of Japanese and Korean purchases of Iranian oil. If they don't rely on Iranian oil, then we may be out on a limb, and we may have to fall to our own devices to see what could be done. But even here, I think, the Americans say they want it brought down to zero, but there are questions of refining, the oil industry requirements. Also, you know, Trump will be very, very sensitive to the price of oil, because the price of oil in the United States is gas stations, is a very sensitive issue. So he will, I am sure, take into account the shortage in the international market that is inevitable as a result of stoppage of Iranian exports, and that may also determine the attitude towards Indian purchases.
Right. You know, Professor, so what do we do then? Do we play the waiting game, wait for November the 4th to come and go by and see what happens after that? Do we continue to have negotiations with the United States? Or if sanctions indeed are imposed, as is being suggested, then what are our options really?
Well, just a point that Mr. Nair was making, I think if you look at what Japan and the South Koreans have done, they have actually reduced dramatically their intake from Iran. So I think that is something that we may not be falling in the same category as they are, because they have given clear, they seem to be indicating that they are willing to abide by what America is suggesting. But I think by and large, what we have been trying to do is, to me, seems good enough in the present circumstances, that we have sort of made a very good case to the Americans on both these issues. That look, on both these issues, it's very important for us that certain things, that our engagement with Russia and our engagement with Iran continues. I think we have also indicated that while we may be increasing some, while we may have given some orders on the Iranian question, there are signs that we have also reduced some intake from Iran. It may not be to the satisfaction of the Americans, but certainly there is a trajectory here which needs to be kept in mind. There is also the idea that, look, for India at this point in time, because of the various reasons, the quality of oil, the quality of our refineries, I think to expect India to go to zero by November 4th is perhaps not an option. I think the engagement with America has continued on these fronts in the past by making this case, and therefore we have seen the Trump administration officials for a long time being very sympathetic to India's case. So I doubt very much whether that would change in the coming days and months. I think we will double those efforts, but I think we should. But clearly, there are times when it may not be sufficient, and this may be one of the times, because the logic of the administrative logic that American decision making follows perhaps would be very different in this case, because we may make a very good case, and that case may even be bought by the American officialdom,
right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it will be bought by Mr. Trump. So therefore there is that disjuncture, and which we should be aware of, that despite our best efforts, it may not work out the way we want to, and therefore are we prepared? And I think the ambassador made a very important point, that are we prepared to take some of this in our stride and say, well, it has happened, now what? And prepare ourselves for that future, because the problem in India also is that if these sanctions, as they kick in, there'll be big media headlines, and there'll be temptation to go back to the old anti-American rhetoric in the Indian intellectual establishment, and it will reignite some of the older debates that
We have to tread very carefully going forward is
and
what
we
you're
have, some of
suggesting.
these
Yeah.
debates that we have resolved would come back. That's America being a trusted partner or not. What can we do with what kind of a relationship we should have with Americans? Whether we should cut off all relations with America. I mean, those sorts of extreme debates that at one point in time were par for the course in India.
Yeah, everyone should proceed cautiously going forward. Whatever happens is what you're suggesting. All right, Ambassador, President Trump was not the only one who made a statement about sanctions. Even the Russian envoy to India, of course, has spoken about this, and he has slammed CAATSA. What do you make of his statement?
Well, naturally, the Russians are very happy that India has gone ahead and signed the deal with them for the supply of the anti-missile air defense system. There is going to be some discussion on these issues at the forthcoming meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also, because the Chinese have been slapped with sanctions. But to my mind, there are two separate issues. The first issue is that of the purchase of the missile defense system from the Russians, and the second is the issue of the purchase of oil from the Iranians. Now, this matter relating to the air defense system has been analyzed in great detail by our security analysts. It has been reviewed at the highest levels in government, and I think we have come to the conclusion that we do need that air defense system because of our security needs. The second is the matter of oil. Now, in due course, like some of the other importers of Iranian oil, we would be able to reduce the oil imports from Iran if we choose to. Not that we necessarily have to. I do not want to go into the morality of this question, but on the practicality, we can reduce. The air defense system is a totally different kettle of fish. We need it for our security needs. So I think, since the topic of your discussion today is negotiating sanctions, I think we should continue the negotiations with the Americans, whatever they decide in the next few days, to emphasize that the air defense system is of primordial importance to us, that it is vital for our security needs, and therefore it is something that is non-negotiable.
Right.
In regard to the oil imports from Iran, we are doing our best to scale them down, and we hope to bring them down as much as possible and as drastically as possible. So our focus should be at the moment on the air defense system and making sure that even if any sanctions are imposed, then we should negotiate our way forward and get them removed. Because no sanction is for with a permanent effect. Nothing is permanent in these matters. There is always a negotiation route available.
Right.
And I think it will be up to our negotiators, even if sanctions are imposed, to make sure that the way forward is cleared, that any bumps in the road are removed, that certain openings are created, and let's see where we can go from that.
All right. Mr. Nair, the envoy has also said that Russia is keen on agreements with India on the lines of Lemoa and CAATSA. Now, is that something that we should get into really?
Well, with or without the agreement, our defense ties with Russia are much, much more strong than with any other country. So with Russia, these agreements, these formalities of these agreements really don't matter. I will tell you a little story. 25 years have passed since I was told this story, so now I can say that. The defense secretary of India's defense secretary in the 1990s, early 1990s, Mr. Nambiar, told me that he has long retired, so there's no problem in narrating the story now. After the Soviet Union broke up, we were in panic because our defense, that time everything came from the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And with the breakup, some factories were in Ukraine, some of the other spare parts were manufactured somewhere else, maybe in Georgia. or something, and we were in panic about supplies. So Mr. Nambiar led this delegation, which included people from the 3 services, senior officers from the services. They went to Moscow, and they particularly wanted some batteries for the Navy ships, I think. So we said we need it urgently. So the Soviets told, by then the Russians told Mr. Nambiar and his delegation that you don't need them. These batteries are with you. So much of these batteries are there, and they are in your depot in Visakhapatnam, And we didn't know, because our inventories were all still being handwritten and typewritten and all that. But the Russians had already computerized everything, and they had delivered it in Visakhapatnam, So they knew what we needed more than we did. Our ties with Russia in defense are so strong, so intense and so deep. So they are beyond agreements. We don't need these agreements because they are so strong, and I think they will remain strong for a foreseeable period of time.
Professor, the way forward really, as far as the entire situation and negotiating these sanctions are concerned, what's the best way forward?
Well, I think the best at this point we can only speculate. So, one would hope that these sanctions would not be in place. So ideally, the logic of Indo-US relationship would be, we would be able to convey that, and that would be enough for the Trump administration to take a look at these issues in the broader context. But if if the worst happens, if these sanctions are imposed, then I think we have to figure out a way of overcoming the problems. And I think the relationship with America remains, very important for us for various reasons. And I think while I agree with Mr. Nair that we have a very strong relationship with Russia, it is increasingly unidimensional. With America, we have a multidimensional relationship, and I think we cannot really afford to make America to sort of disrupt that upward trajectory. It is very important for us. It is also important for the Americans, and I think we need to make them, if they do not see it, if Mr. Trump does not see it, I think the others see it. I think the way forward would be to making a case through the administration up all the way to the president that this is a very important relationship for both of us, and the imposition of sanctions has a very Cold War-ish ring to it in India, and therefore if this goes through, then I think it will do some lasting damage to all the achievements that we have had in the last 30 years, in the last 3 decades after Cold War. I think a lot of it would be damaged, and I think it would require much greater effort to undo that damage. So rather than going through the process, it would be much more meaningful to sort of have an engagement at this stage where we can sort of look at each other and look at each other's engagements and see perhaps the future, which is full of potential for this relationship. So I hope that sanity will prevail and it won't happen. But if it happens, we should be ready with our options.
I think all the panelists have stressed enough that, hope for the best and prepare for the worst as well, is what everyone's saying. 2 minutes left on the program. Quick closing comments from all my guests, starting with you, Ambassador.
Well, very frankly, we need good lobbyists for us in the United States. Now, we have made a large-scale purchase of over $500 million in terms of this air defense system, but our defense needs are colossal. We need many things. There would be some of our defense requirements which would be met from the United States. So the US would not gain anything by sanctioning our defense purchase organizations, because those same organizations would be purchasing from the United States, and US companies would need to sell to them. So what good would it do by sanctioning us in that context? I think the way forward for us is to explain to the Americans that while we needed to buy this from the Russians, there are certain things which we need to buy from them. And there is no point in shutting the door on each other.
Mr. Nair.
Well, in conclusion, I think our program should also take note of the fact that these sanctions are illegal. These are American sanctions. These are not UN sanctions, So we are under no obligation to follow them. In fact, we should defy them because they are unilateral sanctions imposed because of a third country on us. We have to follow because the United States is powerful and we need American companies, we need the American banking system. But while for practical reasons, we follow this. Deep down, we should not forget even for a moment that these sanctions are utterly illegal and have no force of international law.
Professor, in one line, your closing comment.
I think for us, both our relationships are very important with Russia, with America, and I think in an ideal world, we would like to balance both of them. But we don't live in ideal times, and therefore we should be prepared to make some give and take. I think a bit of transactionalism in foreign policy is always good. We should learn from Mr. Trump.
All right. With that, then, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective. For us, a little bit of give and take as far as everyone is concerned is the consensus here on the program. That's it from me. See you again next time.